Right. Very good. We will begin the Planning Committee meeting of Akron City Council. I'd like to request a roll call, please.
Fusco.
Aye.
Kamer.
Aye.
Connor. Boyes. And Hannah.
Aye.
All committee members are present except for Councilwoman Boyes.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion that we accept the minutes of the previously held meeting.
I second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? The ayes have it. Very good. We have, I believe, 7 items, up for public hearing today. And the procedure will simply be this, in that we will first receive a report. And I understand we're going to do things slightly different today, but the report that we receive will be referencing all 7 items. So it'll be somewhat consolidated versus typically we go through every item individually. We'll have to go through every item individually to be read in, I'm pretty sure. We'll have to read those in after the presentation. And then afterwards, I believe we're going to be okay to have one public hearing on everything. So that's the way we're going to do this. After the presentation, though, from Planning Department, we will ask the clerk of council to swear in any individuals that wish to testify before the committee. After that, we'll open up the public hearing portion. And after comments are made, we'll then close the public hearing portion, open it up to committee members for comments or questions, and then to all of council for comments and questions. We will repeat that this evening, the same procedures basically, at 5 o'clock. And the only difference is that we will make a recommendation after that. The committee to all of council, either in favor, against, or to table an item, take time. Those are the procedures. So with that, I will ask Sarah, do you want to read in the first item or all 7, or how about that piece?
I was going to check with the law department. The items have all been read in previously. Can I read in the first one and explain that it's for items 1 through 7, or do I need to read in each title clause again? All together? Okay. So this public hearing will be for the ordinance amending, supplementing Title 15, Chapter 153 Zoning Code, Article 2, Districts and Maps, and Article 5, Accessory Uses in Residence Districts by adding use districts to the form-based zoning code and the Summit Lake rezoning and declaring an emergency. And again, this public hearing will be for items 1 through 7 on the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Viviano. Very good. Mr. D'Angelo, are you here, or Mr. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Fusco and members of the committee, for the opportunity to discuss the legislation before you today. When planning staff comes before council to discuss legislation related to zoning and land use regulation, we always refer to the Akron's Land Use and Development Guide. And the guide was adopted by council in 1987, and itself was an update of an earlier version from 1978. So the framework that guides our land use decisions in the city is nearly 50 years old. And that framework laid out a particular focus on taking advantage of vacant land that opened up for development through the annexation process. Obviously a very different context than that which we're typically operating in today. And the guide is clearly inadequate to addressing many of the city's current needs, especially the redevelopment of our older neighborhoods like Summit Lake. That document defines apartments as a detriment to what should be exclusively single-family neighborhoods. And so most of Summit Lake and much of the city were zoned for exclusively single-family neighborhoods, a classification that's completely at odds with the history of that neighborhood, and as we've learned in conversation with residents and stakeholders, its future. The rezoning and the legislation coming before you today is necessary to support Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority's application to the Federal Neighborhood Choice Initiative and its plans to redevelop the Summit Lake apartments. It's necessary to attract additional private investment to the neighborhood and to help Summit Lake achieve the vision of its residents as a walkable, accessible, safe, and healthy neighborhood. A few weeks ago, HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge visited Akron and Summit Lake in particular, and when asked about AMHA's application to this program, she very pointedly said, do not bother to submit an application to this program if you haven't addressed exclusionary zoning, which is what we are considering today by adopting a more inclusive, form-based code for Summit Lake that will allow a broader range of redevelopment activity and support a broader range of housing needs than is currently allowed. Akron needs a new comprehensive plan and corresponding update to our land use regulations, but that's a very expensive process. And we have opportunities, such as what is happening at Summit Lake, that cannot wait. And so we are looking at how to guide development in individual neighborhoods in ways that align with the vision of residents, as happened with the adoption of the form-based code in Merriman Valley last year, and now with this request to adopt form-based codes to guide the redevelopment of Summit Lake. And we'll continue to look for opportunities where we can work with neighbors, stakeholders, and council to identify broadly shared goals for neighborhood redevelopment and use form-based codes to advance those goals. And with that, I'll turn it over to Daniel D'Angelo, our city planner, to talk through the specifics of this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Hi, everybody. Daniel D'Angelo, planner and architect with Office of Integrated Development. Thanks so much for having us this afternoon to talk about the rezoning in the Summit Lake neighborhood. The rezoning is coming out of our Summit Lake neighborhood land plan that was done during 2021 and early 2022. We had a really extensive interaction process with the community. We had a whole bunch of meetings, I think maybe over a dozen meetings with the neighbors. We had a walking tour. We did some workshops where we actually sat and drew on the maps and did Post-its and talked through what the residents would like to see in their neighborhood. We did a neighborhood survey and some focus groups. And that all took place in 2021, early 2022, with the intention that we were going to rezone the neighborhood. Since it's been a little while since we met with the residents regarding the rezoning, we felt like it was important to go back in January and really just kind of confirm what the direction we were going was the right direction. We had a great meeting. There were about 70 people there, and Councilwoman Somerville was there also, and we just had a really good conversation with the folks in the neighborhood about what we're proposing and what we're going to talk to you today about. So as you can see, it's been a really involved process. We feel like we've gotten some really good feedback and good conversation with the residents. These are the themes that came out of those conversations. Everything from, they'd like to see, residents would like to see local businesses, more local businesses in their neighborhood, something like a coffee shop or a cafe, a barber shop. They'd like to see better sidewalk conditions. They'd like to see better bus shelters. There's a whole range of things that we talked about, and we can talk about that more if you want to, but I'm going to keep moving in for the sake of brevity here. There's four main things that we are working on to kind of bring that community vision to fruition in the neighborhood, amongst lots of other things that the city is doing. And so they are create a land plan for the vacant parcels. We wanted to make sure that we were setting aside land for public green space, updating the zoning code, which is the main thing we're going to talk about today, but I wanted to kind of give some highlights of those other steps and improving neighborhood and safety through the zoning code. So the thing that we did was we talked with residents about how can we use these neighborhood assets that we have. We own 400 lots in the neighborhood. How can we use those lots to benefit the community and lift the community up? And so through those discussions, we, collaboratively with the residents came up with this map of the uses that they'd like to see in the neighborhood. Mainly, they'd like to see more retail along the two main north-south corridors, Lakeshore and Old Main Street, and allow a mix of residential uses within the middle of the neighborhood. We call this a refrigerator map because the idea is that we'll have this map on our office walls here in City Hall. You can have them in your office, and then residents can have them at home. And when development proposals come to the neighborhood, we can all look at this map and say, do those proposals align with what the community said they wanted? Or if they don't, then let's have a deeper discussion about that. So it's kind of an accountability tool to make sure that we're all, envisioning what the vision that came out of that community process is realized going forward. The second thing that we did during the land plan was to designate space for public green spaces. This is a map of the existing public green spaces, and the one thing that you can see is that they're really concentrated around the lake, and there's not so much on the eastern side of the neighborhood, and that's what this diagram shows. Just shows kind of the coverage of where the green spaces are and how easy it is to walk to them. So you can see the eastern portion of the neighborhood and the kind of northeastern portion of the neighborhood are kind of lacking green spaces. And we heard that from the residents also, that they didn't feel like there was enough green space in the neighborhood. We felt like maybe there was enough, but not well distributed. So I asked our GIS person, Mike Meyer, who did an amazing job and created this map, to look at all the neighborhoods and how are we doing in Summit Lake compared to our other city neighborhoods. And so Summit Lake's at 9.9% of the land area is public park space, which is actually pretty significant. It's not as much as the Merriman Valley, but of course that's the valley with several metro parks, and Goodyear Heights has the Goodyear Metro Park, so that's why that percentage is so high. Summit Lake is actually doing much better than places like Fairlawn Heights and Highland Square. So, and then it's kind of in alignment with the overall Akron average of 9.7 and the national average of 8.6%. That's a percentage of park space. So we feel like really it's this idea of distributing the park space a little bit better throughout the neighborhood. So we took the land that the city owns and we decided we're going to designate some of that land for additional park space on the eastern and northeastern portions of the neighborhood. That's it's a long-range plan. It's not going to happen overnight, but you can see the coverage of that neighborhood becomes much better when we add those green spaces. And then the real thing that we're talking about today is updating the zoning code and hoping to improve neighborhood safety through that zoning code. So these are those 12 kind of highlighted areas that came out of the community feedback. These are the things that can be addressed by zoning, things like making development possible on these sites, making housing development possible. Right now, the corner stores aren't really allowed in much of the neighborhood except along Old Main Street. So the residents said they wanted more retail along Lakeshore, but that's not really allowed right now. So those are the kinds of things that we can address with this zoning that we're proposing. So right now, there's this kind of mismatch between the existing zoning and the existing land use, even right now. So most of the neighborhood is zoned single family, but those orange and yellow lots that are on the right-hand side, those are all duplexes or multifamily dwellings. So right now, those are legal non-conforming uses within the neighborhood. So there's much more diversity within the neighborhood than what the zoning is really saying. In fact, there's 37% of the dwelling units in the neighborhood are not single-family dwellings, but the whole thing is zoned single-family. So we're just trying to get the zoning more aligned with what's happening in the neighborhood and what we'd like to see in the neighborhood, what the residents said they wanted to see in the neighborhood. So we want to support missing middle housing. And what that really means is just it's duplexes, small apartment buildings, townhouses. Those already exist in the neighborhood. We want to make sure they can continue to exist. Those units generally tend to be more affordable than a single-family house on a large lot. And it also kind of gives you more choice as far as what kind of dwelling unit you want to live in. If you're a single parent with only one child, you don't necessarily need a four-bedroom, single-family house, and maybe you don't want to take care of that yard. If you're an older person living in the neighborhood, you're tired of taking care of your house, but you want to stay in the neighborhood because you have neighborhood connections, maybe you move into an apartment building. If it's all single-family, you don't have that option. You got to move somewhere else. So the idea is to allow that missing middle to happen. And also it becomes a little bit of a challenge for smaller scale developers if they want to buy a duplex or a small apartment building in the neighborhood. It's not zoned for that, and so the bank wants to know, is it a legal non-conforming use or not? And so we have to issue a zoning letter saying that it is. It's just one more piece of paperwork that we're trying to get rid of an obstacle to neighborhood investment. And that email just is one example of that came in about a month ago, but we're getting those, we get several of those a week throughout the city. So it's a challenge for small developers. It's also can be an obstacle for larger development. AMHA wants to redevelop the apartments that are on the Summit Lake apartments that are on the lake shore. They're aging, the foundations are settling, they don't have air conditioning. So over time they want to replace those with new units, but their land is zoned to family. So even the apartment buildings that are there right now are non-conforming. And if they want to rebuild with townhouses and small apartment buildings, they wouldn't be able to do that under the current zoning. And that's a real problem for funding because when you apply for funding, you have to show that the proposed development actually meets the current zoning code. So right now it does not. That's another reason why we want to rezone it and kind of fix that mismatch. So we want to do that by using the Akron form-based zoning code that you all passed in November and mapping that here in Summit Lake itself. When we wrote that zoning code back last year, we were writing it specifically for the Merriman Valley, but we knew that we would want to expand it to other neighborhoods in the city as well, and so we kind of wrote it with that in mind. And I just want to remind you why we need the new zoning code, just very briefly. The current code was initially written in 1922. It's been adapted over time, but it's not really addressing some of the things that I think we all think are important. It's pretty silent on things like pedestrian safety, neighborhood safety, equity, housing affordability. The current code doesn't really address those things the way that the form-based code does. And so that's why we feel like it's important to roll that code out to more neighborhoods in the city over time. So it's mapped right now in the Merriman Valley, and we're proposing that this zoning code gets applied to the Summit Lake neighborhood next. And so what we're proposing is the new zoning map that you guys have, and then there's the 8 existing zoning districts that are in this code, and then we're adding 3 new zoning districts in this amendment. And the reason we're doing that is because we wrote the code for the Merriman Valley with the idea that some of those districts in the Merriman Valley code could be applied here, but we also recognize that Summit Lake is a different character than the Merriman Valley. Just as for instance, the setbacks in Summit Lake, the front yard setbacks are a little deeper than they are in the Merriman Valley, so we needed a new zoning district to accommodate that. And then there are some minor text changes that we've made to the overall code that are also included in this packet. Just things mostly for clarity that we've come across already that we're like, this needs to be a little clearer. So this is the proposed zoning map, and I'm just going to quickly go through each of the districts just so you can understand where they are. There's the open space park district that's going to be basically on the lake shore. Those existing parks that are already there, the Open M Park, the Nature Center, and the new Summit Lake North Shore Park that's under construction right now. That district is just what you think of as a park district. It allows play courts and splash pads and community centers, but that's only community-oriented outdoor activities. And which, interestingly, our current zoning code doesn't have any park space district in it right now. So that's part of the reason why we wanted a new one, so we can apply that. Then there's 3 neighborhood districts. These all allow residential, so kind of that cream color or yellow color. They allow a mix of residential uses. The 2 colors of orange allow limited amount of retail and things like corner stores, so those things that the residents said that they wanted. Something like a beauty salon or a coffee shop, but they're limited in scale. They're only 5,000 square feet, so they're not intrusive in the neighborhood, and they're really meant for local use, something you could walk to, not necessarily something that's going to be like a regional draw. So those 3 neighborhood districts, this is the mixed missing middle district that allows everything from single-family houses up to small apartment buildings. They're limited to 12 units. That's why it's N 2.512. So that allows that mix of uses. So there's neighborhood flex 2.5. It's limited to 2.5 stories and allows those corner stores. And then along Lakeshore, we're allowing a little bit more height and density because the bus line is located on Lakeshore. So we feel like it's actually okay to go a little bit higher and allow more residents to have access to that bus line. There's 2 mixed-use districts. Oh, and these are the last 2 districts, so this is good. There's 2 mixed-use districts. There's mixed-use MX3, which is along Lakeshore and along Old Main Street, and then the MX mixed-use flex, which is along Kenmore and Ira. And so the mixed-use 3 just allows retail on the ground floor and residential above, so it allows a little bit more dynamic character. You don't have to have retail on the ground floor, but it allows that possibility. So we think that's important. And then the mixed-use flex allows for those existing light industrial and commercial uses that are already along Kenmore Boulevard, but also allows for retail and office uses. So that's the whole zoning map that we're proposing and the zoning code that we're proposing. We really feel like this is helping achieve those goals that came out of our Summit Lake neighborhood plan. It's creating a safer, more walkable neighborhood. Residents can be healthier because they're walking more and they have access to green space. It's more equitable for all residents because it accommodates not just cars, but also pedestrians and bicycles and buses. Gives you a housing choice instead of just single family. Encourages investment by reducing barriers, and I think almost most importantly, it gives zoning clarity. It gives predictability and transparency for all of us who are involved in this, whether you're a resident, a developer, or somebody in the administration. We all know what the goal is for the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, we'll now ask if there's anyone here wishing to testify before the committee. If you could please be sworn in by our clerk, Sarah Biviano.
Could you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth? If so, please say, "I do." Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll open up the public hearing and ask if there's anyone here wishing to testify in favor or against even this proposal, these proposals, I should say. I'll make it plural, Ms. Biviano, referencing the Summit Lake form-based zoning proposal. Please step to the microphone. If you please provide for us your name and address. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Holly Malik,
Welcome.
project manager for Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority. So that address is 100 Cedar Avenue. Much of what I want to say was already been presented by both Daniel and Kyle today, but I would like to reiterate that we are in favor, AMHA is in favor of the form-based zoning code for Summit Lake. Adoption of this code, as has been noted, is critical to implement the Summit Lake Choice Neighborhoods Transformation Plan. And that was developed through extensive and intentional community engagement over 2 years. It will lead to over $200 million of investment in Summit Lake. And so specifically, this code allows AMHA to redevelop 239 apartments into 479 mixed-income apartments in the neighborhood and will promote infill development and future investments in the neighborhood. And has been noted, Secretary Fudge was here a few weeks ago and said that we require this form-based coding to be passed before we could even submit for the grant. So it's something that we believe in personally, but also need it for our the work that we're doing in the area. Thank you.
Thanks.
My name is Ann Parks Cook, and I'm a resident. We've lived on Princeton Street for 15 years. And I think that this rezoning will bring into the neighborhood services that are badly needed. But we have some services already there that are really essential to us, and one of them is the gardens. And there's a vegetable garden on the corner of Edison and Long, And when I looked at the map, it said residential. It takes a long time to make a productive garden. You have to build the soil. You've got to get everything ready. And that garden is beautiful and it's productive and it provides a lot of education to the neighborhood and also fresh produce, which is something that we don't have access to close by. So I wondered if they're going to build houses on our garden, because it says residential there instead of agricultural or whatever zoning it ought to be. So I just wanted to ask about that.
Thank you so much, and we'll make sure we follow up after the public hearing with our planning department folks.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention, though. And thank you for coming down this afternoon. We appreciate it. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Don Dissler, Chief Executive Officer with the Metro Regional Transit Authority, 416 Kenmore Boulevard. So we are a neighbor of Summit Lake, and we very much support this new zoning because this is going to help so much with our projects also, with bus rapid transit and bringing more sustainable transportation into the area and being able to help those dense areas and help people to be able to move to the spots that they need to go to. So we really feel that this zoning will help with the transportation as well as the density and really make this area even more livable and just more of a neighborhood than it already is.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Al Bragg with Alpha Phi Alpha Homes, 662 Wolf Ledges Parkway. I just want to speak in support of this legislation as well, because we want to partner with AMHA and put a low-rise senior building in the area. And not only that, on the first floor of that building, we would like to have services for the senior population. Ideally, we would embed EMS in that building so that they can do well checks on a regular basis. In addition to that, doctors, such as a podiatrist or audiologist, to provide additional services. And I was just approached by Community Action, and they would like us to have a portion of that building to be used for daycare, approximately 6 to 8 daycare rooms. So that would be obviously a mixed-use building and fit right into the new form-based code.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for that. Anyone else wishing to speak to the committee? This gentleman here doesn't need any introduction.
But very kind of you, Councilman Fusco. Dan Rice with the Ohio and Erie Canalway Coalition, 47 West Exchange Street. I just want to rise today in support of this important legislation. It really addresses some needs of the neighborhood residents, as we heard already. I also want to really recognize the planning department, Mr. Julian, Mr. D'Angelo, for your responsiveness to the needs and really listening to the neighborhood residents. It was evident by the tremendous attendance at that January meeting. It was actually an overflowing meeting. You did an excellent job, and I really appreciate, you were, really taking that resident-led approach. So that means a lot to us, and, it's been our privilege and honor to serve as a convener for Akron Civic Commons over the past 8 years, to co-create, co-design, and co-steward accessible, equitable, and welcoming parks, trails, and public spaces. And this zoning code change actually complements that very nicely. And it's definitely an essential change that's needed. So we strongly urge you to adopt this. And again, congratulations and thank you for your commitment to the residents.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Anyone else here wishing to speak before the committee? Anyone? Anyone online? No? Very good. Then with that, we'll close the public hearing and we'll open up to any comments or questions from any committee members at this time. Mr. Hanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank you for also enlightening me with phone base.
Yes.
I remember when you first told me about it, I didn't know anything about it. But a couple of questions and comments I'd like to make is that I really like what the lady said about the garden. we're dealing with a situation like that right now, and hopefully, with the new zoning, they will put, and there's no gardening on this map, hopefully they will put a small section for the residents to do gardening. Also, when you talk to the residents, will there be private developers coming in with AMHA? And will AMHA be setting the fees for the rentals of these properties? Because according to this map, the housing is upscale. And my main concern is that if you are building these upscale residents and shops and beauty salons, and you say coffee shops, which are not there now, and beauty salons are not there now, what about the residents that's there now? What are you going to do with them? How are you going to move them around? How are you going to shuffle them around? And will they be able to come back into the neighborhood? Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Gillian?
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. So a couple things there. The zoning code updates do not directly address affordability and price points. And so if a building is allowed under the zoning code, it can be allowed as an expensive residential unit, or it can be allowed as an affordable residential unit. So right now, we have been working with AMHA, as well as Alpha Phi Alpha Homes, and others as well, to advance the development of affordable housing in the neighborhood. And that's been our primary push right now. But at the same time, we would like to make Summit Lake a place that's attracted to private investment as well, and allow developers, small developers in particular, the opportunity to meet housing needs in the neighborhood. We have a lot of vacant land, the 400-plus parcels that are held by the city, plus many more that are held by the land bank, plus many more that are just in limbo and held by private interests. We need development to fill that in there. And also, we're working through strategies in ways that we can help to make sure that the current residents are not displaced by additional development activity. And certainly AMHA is committed to relocating everyone in their current apartments that wants to stay in the neighborhood, giving them an opportunity to stay there. And so, we're trying to be flexible and meet the need, attract private investment, but also recognize that we need to really be thoughtful about not displacing people. Now, those strategies for non-displacement are things that happen really outside of the zoning code. And those are other types of investments that we need to be making, both in people and in buildings.
Okay, good. Are you okay? Any more questions? I think the one wasn't answered, though, referencing the Edison and Long
the garden.
Street. Yeah, I'm curious about that, if there's an adjustment or something with regards to that. It seems to be moving it to open space, possibly.
Right, so we're not rezoning every community garden to open space, but we are committed to preserving those community gardens in the neighborhood. The existing zoning, the new zoning allows for community gardens in any district.
It's a lesser use, but it also opens the door for development, which I think what we hear, and we've seen here on the city council from time to time, where I believe neighborhoods get attached to gardens, if you will, for lack of a better term. There's a lot of time commitment, and they're hard to move. They're not portable. I know they say potable, but portable? Either one. But regardless, it seems as though, I think preserving some of those ought to be some of the discussion, perhaps.
Go ahead.
Well, the only other thing I would say is that those community gardens, the ones that they're either privately owned or they're on City of Akron land. So,
Gotcha.
So we would not sell that land for development. And that's why that one map that I showed you of the designated green spaces exists. So that's actually, maybe I forgot to say that, is that we made this map so that when developers come to us and say, affordable or market rate developers say, I want to build a house here, we can say, well, no, that's actually the wrong place because we want to keep those community gardens. But would you like these 3 lots over here instead? Those have been designated for development. So I think it's just being very mindful and, designating where the gardens are and where they are not.
Gotcha.
And any existing gardens we want to keep for sure. We recognize the value in the neighborhood. I'm a gardener. I mean, we recognize those are great community spaces, and we want to keep them. But we felt it was getting, if you rezoned individual lots to park and open space, that would be kind of too onerous, I guess.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to meet after the meeting, so with you and us, and sit down, and so we can maybe narrow down where those are exactly located, and perhaps even who owns them, so we can just talk about that. Very good. Any other questions? You good? Any other committee members, Sharon Connor? Oh, I did see that, thank you. Any committee members? It's hearing none. I see President Somerville.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure. Is Councilwoman Amobian on the committee? I'll defer to her first if she is.
She's not.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak in support of the changes with the form-based zoning. And I wanted to thank the Planning Department for their great presentation. We have spent a lot of work in Summit Lake, starting with Dan Rice, and really engaging residents in saying what it is that they would like to see in their neighborhoods. And through the process of Akron Civic Commons and the Summit Lake Neighborhood Plan and Choice Neighborhoods, Summit Lake residents have said and told us what they want to see in their neighborhood. And a lot of things that they have asked for, our current zoning will not allow, right? And so that's why it's very important that we have these conversations so that we can make all the plans of the Summit Lake Neighborhood Plan and Choice Neighborhood Plan a reality. But we have to be able to address some of the zoning issues, and we'll be able to do that with these new form-based zoning changes. So we are really excited about these changes and asking for all of council's support. I also want to talk a little bit just about the gardens, just to give a little background history in the Summit Lake neighborhood, which really and truly why this is so exciting, because, Summit Lake for many years has been a neighborhood that has been underinvested and overlooked. And community gardens have always been a vital component in Summit Lake. Before they even had a grocery store, right? It was the community gardens, Miss Julie's Gardens and Let's Grow Akron that was really feeding that community before we were able to bring a full grocery store to Summit Lake. So just want to let the resident know that as the ward council person, we're always going to champion and make sure that there are spaces for community gardens, because again, that has been the legacy of Summit Lake for so long. Through gardens and being able to feed the community. So again, I just want to say that I am supportive and asking all of council also for their support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, President Somerville. I think you touched on something. We've been discussing the form base in a couple of neighborhoods in our city, and we've also discussed for years, with all respect, the need for an update. I know Mr. Antonucci and I have talked about the development guide plan and how do we get there, because it is. And this approach, I think, is perhaps better than trying to do it all at once throughout the entire city. But then again, conversely, though, I think we need to find our sea legs, I guess, in terms of how we go about this. Me personally, there's 2 concerns that I have. One being that we are going to do this equitably throughout the city in terms of engaging folks. I applaud the efforts of President Somerville and the Planning Department in terms of getting 70 or so people at a meeting, property owners, everyone, pulling in the same, direction in terms of engagement with the community. I'd like to see a plan, if possible, and perhaps council could be part of that in terms of developing a strategy moving forward, because we're getting these things and we're seeing, we're spending a whole lot of money on engagement over here and a whole lot over there, perhaps not as much in other areas. I just want to see it to be equitable and property owners to know what we're being asked to pass. That's one thing I'm really concerned about. Secondly, the second thing I'm concerned about is that, and Mr. Julian and I talked about this, and that is the piece referencing the, it's going to be one and done, and I understand that, unless there's a significant change in the land use requested by the owner. And I know part of this is going to make it easier for developers moving forward. It's gonna take some of the process out and guide them. But then again, conversely, council is not going to be aware. So I'd ask us to work together on something perhaps whenever, just as easy as whenever permits are taken out, just so ward council members are aware what's going on in their neighborhood that they represent. They need to know. And if, a number of developments are going to go in that are pretty sizable and such, they're going to need to know that. And right now we do know, for the most part, not all the time, but, and I think that's, for a ward person to be aware, I think is important. So those are just a couple quick things. I see Ms. Amobian's hand is up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the form-based zoning. I know that the retreat, you shared a lot with us, but to really see it in action, it looks like it's an opportunity to not only include the citizens, but to be creative and think creatively. Now, as we start thinking creatively about doing this, I don't want us to lose sight of the point that Mr. Hanna made, because funding is critical to support the citizens who are living there now. If we plan to allow them to continue to stay there, because when you start beautifying a lake area, you start thinking about folks wanting to build large homes, beautiful homes around the lake. And if people want to continue to live in that neighborhood, we have to make sure that it's affordable. So I know we have the $8 million we're probably going to talk about during the budget cycle that we're going through in the next few days, that we have earned from the ARPA dollars. Maybe this is a good time to start thinking about how we set aside some of those dollars for that area or whatever projects. But I am just as concerned about us being creative and thinking creatively and wanting to do the right thing, but thinking about the funding that it's going to take for those individuals who want to stay in that area, how you're going to help them subsidize and upgrade their homes as they stay there. The other question I have has to do with, we've talked about this, and I don't see how this would be any kind of disruption at all, but people that do in-home businesses and things like may do hair, may do some product selling, I don't know, but we were talking about that as some people do things like that in their homes. This in no way will prevent that from happening. And I know that there's always the question about parking that comes to play, but some neighborhoods in some areas have folks who have a salon or something that they do in their homes. So how does this, I don't think it would prevent it, but how would it work?
Mr.
Would they have to declare?
Yeah, I would say that this actually adds more opportunity for in-home businesses because we're including a lot of mixed use in this neighborhood. So that's going to allow more in-home businesses. We also define in residential itself, we're still allowing home-based businesses to occur in this neighborhood. So yes, this does allow more makerspace, home-based businesses and that kind of thing.
Seems like COVID is obviously, that's more and more in demand.
Seen a lot of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Mobian? Good.
No, I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I agree with your comments about what Mr. Hanna had mentioned. Absolutely. I see President Somerville's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond to Councilwoman Amobian's point in terms of the residents who have been in the community for some time, which we have a lot who've been in the community 30, 20 years. And so we have had some conversations with Helen Tomic in terms of trying to find some money and resources where we can help homeowners who are there in Summit Lake currently making some additional home repairs to their house on the outside facade, things of that nature. So we are trying to find some funds to make that a reality.
Thank you, President Somerville. No, this is a great plan for an area that has been underserved, and so appreciate the efforts of President Somerville as a council ward person and planning department and the mayor's office and everyone who's been involved. It's a long process. I see Mr. Rice over there. I know you were involved at the very beginning, and appreciate all the effort from everyone. It takes a long time to get some things done. But anyways, with that, what I'd like to do is invite everyone back this evening, if you'd like, at 5 o'clock. Council will reconvene. We'll have these public hearings, and again, we'll make a recommendation to all of council referencing these 7 conditional use / form-based ordinances. So thank you all again for coming down. Appreciate it. 5 o'clock. And if you'd like to Zoom in, just contact our folks, and we'll be happy to give you a link. Thank you again for stopping down. With that, we'll go on to the balance of the agenda, and I'm going to recommend time on 8 through and including 11. We have item number 12. This is expressing the support and adoption of the Choice Neighborhood Transformation Plan by the Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. In 2020, AMHA began the Choice Neighborhoods planning process after receiving the Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant through Housing and Urban Development. This process resulted in the development of a transformation plan, which is a requirement in order for them to apply for a future Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant. This transformation plan provides a vision for the neighborhood, and it was shaped by resident input and includes the redevelopment plans for the Summit Lake apartments. The plan outlines 3 main focus areas, including housing, people, and the neighborhood. And the resolution before you today is an official support and adoption of the transformation plan.
Very good. Thank you very much. Is this the one where our Ms. Fudge had said we really don't need to do anything, just do the zoning first, and then everything will fall into place?
Yes.
Not quite as easy as that.
Not quite, huh? It's all
That
good.
was, you're going nowhere if you don't do that. If you don't.
I get
do
it.
zoning.
Yeah,
That was-
no. Message heard. Very good. Thank you so much. What is the request?
Consent.
Okay, that's fine. Financially, what's a request for this?
There is none.
Okay. I thought this was an application for funding, so.
Good afternoon, Helen Tomic with the Planning Department. The transformation plan outlines the strategy
You're right.
that we are going to be undertaking over the next 8 to 10 years.
Gotcha.
So as Dylan indicated, it talks about the people part, it talks about the reconstruction of the existing Summit Lake apartments. It also talks about, as indicated in the previous meeting, it talks about plans to revitalize the entire neighborhood, Summit Lake neighborhood.
Okay.
This is just adopting or supporting the resolution. We will be looking at the financial aspects in the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, because I know we couldn't do that. You know, we're going to have to ask someone to help us with it.
Yes.
Over a 10-year time frame.
Yes.
So, exactly. That's where I was trying to get to. Thank you so much. So the request is for the consent agenda. Is there any questions or comments from any committee members? Nobody? Anybody up?
Councilman?
Okay, very good.
Councilman, can I just make a
Oh,
very
yes,
quick
Mr.
point?
Julian. Yes,
And
sir.
one of the pieces in that strategy, in the plan is addressing concerns about gentrification in the neighborhood and thinking through what are the anti-displacement strategies that we can implement long-term
that's
so
good.
that people can stay in the neighborhood, and that we make sure that if we do have opportunities for higher wealth individuals to come in, we're not displacing folks. So that's one of those things that's in the transformation plan.
Very good. Thank you. That's good to know. Okay, Mr. Hanna? Good. Very good. President Somerville, I see your
Thank
hand
you,
up.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Kyle, for adding that piece. And another thing I just want to also just bring to everyone's attention, AMHA is committed to not only redoing all the existing apartments, but we're talking about almost doubling the amount of housing, affordable housing to that neighborhood. So I think that's really important to note. That's a part of this plan as well. Thank you.
Plus, it's encouraging, both affordable and privately owned, privately held, mixed. I think that's what we're all aiming for here. Very good. Thank you, President. Anything else from anyone? Is there a recommendation for consent agenda?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Very good. The ayes have it. Okay, we're going to take time on the rest of the agenda, short of any questions or comments. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks.
Our next committee today will be the Public Service Committee at 2 o'clock. Those committee members are Kamer, McKittrick, DeShazier, Hardy, and Lombardo. Again, that's the Public Service Committee, and it will begin at 2 o'clock. Thank you. Our next committee today is the Public Service Committee. Those committee members are Kamer, McKittrick, DeShazier, Hardy, and Lombardo. We do have all committee members present whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'd like to call the public service meeting to order, please. All members are present. Can I get approval of last week's minutes, please?
Motion to approve. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of the minutes? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thank you, everyone. We do have 4 new pieces in front of us today. I'm going to ask Sarah, since she's in council chambers, to read in the pieces. If you can start, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or his designee to enter into a contract or contracts with a consultant or consultants for professional engineering services of annual bridge inspection and specifications for the National Bridge Inventory Update and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Sarah. And I do see we have our Service Director, Chris Luttle, with us. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. This legislation, as stated, will allow us to hire a consultant or consultants after we publicly advertise for bids. We have always done this inspection services in-house. We've recently had a couple of our engineers retire, and the specifications have changed. So you need a specialized certification through ODOT to do these inspections, which our engineers didn't have, not that they couldn't have went and got them. So we decided to, for the first 3 years of this inspection, that we will have a consultant do it. They will help us set up the program. So in the first year, there'll be a lot more of this program that will be rolled out. We do not own these 144 bridges that we inspect. They're either owned by Summit County or they're owned by ODOT. But since they are inside of our jurisdiction, it is the responsibility of the municipality to do these inspections. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Committee members, any questions or comments? All right, I don't see any.
Consent.
Do we have any? Okay, thank you. Do we have any other council members?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't see any. Chris said consent is okay. Do I have a motion?
Motion for consent.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor for consent? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thank you. Sarah, next piece, please.
Item number 4 is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and/or the purchasing agent, after publicly advertising for bids, to enter into a contract or contracts for the construction of security fencing and related improvements at the Akron Water Plant and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. Along Ravenna Road, our whole frontage at the water plant, the fencing has been deteriorating to the point where we have done some temporary repairs. So in this project, we not only would like to replace that entire stretch of fence, but we'd like to reconfigure it on the entrances where the chemical trucks pull in. We'd like to widen it, move it back, which is going to be on our property, but we will widen the driveway and we'll do a little bit of a culvert and drainage improvements with this project. So this project was in the capital budget. You did see this last month. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Committee members, any questions or comments? All right, I don't see any. Any other council members? I don't see anyone. All right, what's your pleasure, Chris?
Consent's fine, sir.
Consent, okay. Can I get a motion for consent, please?
So move.
Second.
All right, all in favor of consent? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thanks. Sarah, next piece, please.
Item number 5 is an ordinance authorizing the establishment of a 1-mile quiet zone surrounding the Bastogne Railroad crossing and declaring an emergency.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, on Bastogne, down off of Upper Merriman, we have a rail crossing. And we have been working on this for a few years with the Federal Highway Administration. And what we did, we went ahead and installed gates. And we actually, we installed the gates to the point where if we ever add sidewalks on Bastogne, which there aren't any now, they will fall outside of the gates and pedestrians could walk around the gate on the sidewalk. Like the legislation said, this is our first attempt to establish quiet zones in the city of Akron. This stretch of rail, by installing these, we have to do some restriping yet and signage, and then we can apply. And then what this will allow us to do, that as the trains come through that portion, that 1 mile stretch, they will not sound their horns, as we all have heard at 4 in the morning sometimes as these trains go through residential areas. So our engineering department actually went up to Amherst, Ohio last week, and they met with their city officials, and the federal highway people were there too, to give us some really heads up on some of the things we need to do. Hudson and Streetsboro recently have established a couple quiet zones through their municipality. So, like I said, this was probably the first step to extend this through our city. This $25,000 is just a placeholder for Wheeling and Lake Erie to do a little bit of work. We don't think we'll even get to that point, but that's why we have that $25,000 in there. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Committee members, any questions or comments? I do see Councilman Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Luddle, this is fabulous. I honestly, living next to railroad tracks in Akron my whole life, I didn't even know quiet zones were a thing. So what's the likelihood, or how, I know it's, my understanding is it's taken quite some good deal of work just to bring this one to fruition. Do we think that we can keep going into other crossings?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, you know, this you're familiar with that area as it leaves Bastogne, then it goes and it crosses Merriman.
Yep.
And then it goes and crosses Portage Path, and then it heads out to Market. Obviously, Market would be pretty difficult, obviously, with the width of the road and everything. But we would probably look, the next one is either Merriman, and we could hopscotch. So if it's going to be easier to do Portage Path and not Merriman, that's probably the way we would go, or we would go back towards downtown. Okay. So yes, this is the first one. We get this established, and then we'll look for more funding to do these elsewhere in the city.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Councilman.
Yeah, the residents of Ward 1 in the last 30 days that I've been there are very, very interested in knowing how this is going to pan out. And obviously, at this point, everybody's pretty excited about the opportunity to stay asleep at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, I'm totally a part of that. And if, before we vote, I don't know if this is the order that it goes in, but I'd like to add my name to it as well as a part of this legislation.
Yeah, you're absolutely
but
right.
Kudos to you for getting this done.
That was all engineering, but thank you, sir. And I'll be honest, I mean, you know where I live in North Hill. I could hear those trains, so I don't know what it's like living right next to one. So
you can hear it, and you can
I can
feel
hear
it.
that train at 4 in the morning. Yeah. So, well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions or comments? All right, Chris, what's your pleasure on this one?
Consent's fine, sir.
All right, thanks. Can I get a motion?
Motion for consent.
Second.
All in favor of consent? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thanks. Sarah, can you read in the next piece, please?
Item number 6 is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or his designee to enter into a contract or contracts after publicly advertising for bids for construction of improvements to phosphorus removal system at the Water Reclamation Facility and declaring an emergency.
Chris?
Thank you, sir. And members of council, they have lowered the limit from 1 milligram per liter to 0.07 milligrams per liter of phosphorus discharge into the river. It's the same limit that other wastewater plants have along the Cauga River. We have worked with the EPA well over a year on establishing this new limit. We have a facility just at the end of our wastewater facility. It's an old building we haven't used in 20 years. So we're able to go into that building and install new pumps and tanks to create this, what they use is aluminum sulfate to lower the phosphorus level in the wastewater before it's discharged. So this project It is 500,000. That's mostly for all the infrastructure, the new tanks. Our chemical costs per year are going to be about 100,000. The beauty of this, there is no beauty of this, but the nice thing about this is what they have recently done down at the wastewater plant. They have worked with leachate companies where they take the leachate off of landfills. And when we did our Headworks facility recently, we created an area where they could back in the trucks and unload this leachate without pumping it, because we have been pumping it for years. Well, this leachate actually lowers our phosphorus level in our wastewater. So to give you some idea, last year we charged these haulers 3 cents per gallon. And you're thinking, boy, 3 cents a gallon. We generated $900,000 worth of revenue for the wastewater system, which obviously lowers all our costs, which helps our citizens because it's lower our operating costs by $900,000. And it obviously has helped with this phosphorus level in the wastewater discharge. Since 2018, we have been monitoring this, and there's only been 2 times, 2 different months, where we're even over the 0.07. So we are conservatively thinking our cost for chemical a year, we're going to be around 100,000 at the most. Where if we didn't take the leachate, it would probably be like 500,000 a year. So if you take that extra 400,000, if you don't take leachate, you lose the other 900. You could do the math. It's like 1.3. So I got to give kudos to the people down there at the plant, how much work they've put into this, how they've worked with the EPA, Ohio EPA that is, to get this limit, keep it at 0.07, and obviously phosphorus, as you know, if the levels get too high, then you get algae, and you get algae in the river, and that hurts the aquatic life, and none of us want that. So they've always been good stewards of the river down there, so that credit all goes to them. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Committee members, any questions or comments? I don't see any. Any other council members? Councilman Fusco.
Well, thank you, Chairman. We can't say it enough. I really don't believe we can, in terms of how fortunate we are, the talent that we have in terms of our utilities piece, both the water and the sewer side. I mean, we're very fortunate. They're so creative, and they're on it all the time. And it's, we've talked about, world class before, and I don't think we should use that word loosely, but I will say that they're damn good at what they do, and we're fortunate for that. So with that, just tell them that we're proud of what they do. And
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions or comments? Chris, what's your pleasure?
Consent's fine, sir.
All right. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for consent agenda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thank you. Before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you to my colleague, Councilman Brad McKittrick, for filling in for me the last 2 weeks while I was out. And you did a wonderful job, so thank you. I appreciate that. So with that, we are adjourned.
Our next committee today is the Public Safety Committee. Those committee members are McKittrick, Kamer, Lombardo, Hannah, and Davis. If we will give everyone just a moment here.
I'd like to call the Public Safety Committee to order, please. Are all members present?
Yes, you do have all committee members present.
Okay. Can I get a motion to accept the previous minutes, please?
Motion to accept.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We have two pieces that come before us today. The first ordinance is authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into an agreement with Summit County for the boarding of City of Akron prisoners and declaring an emergency. Sorry. Who's speaking today?
I will, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So before you today, we have what we refer to as the jail bed contract with Summit County. I'm happy to speak to specifics as to what's in the contract itself, but I'll give you kind of the overview, which is generally that we reserve the right to retain up to 100 beds per day in exchange for one flat annual fee. This agreement is different than in years past. This is a one-year agreement. And the idea behind that is that the mayor and the county executive are actively discussing sort of our relationship holistically, looking at many different components and agreements that we have with the county, between the county and the city, and trying to figure out what makes sense moving forward on a long-term basis. But this is sort of an interim agreement. Obviously, the county has an interest in us maintaining this, and we do too. So that is what this piece is. And our chief prosecutor, Mr. Morgan, is here as well to answer any sort of day-to-day kind of questions, practical questions, should you have any.
Thanks, Mr. Angeloni. We have any questions from any committee members? Any other council member? Oh, Councilman Lombardo, go ahead.
I'll give it a shot. So it's just interesting, like Brian said, you know, we have a county jail. You know, we have a county, almost dog pound for lack of better words. But so Akron, would you say that they're the biggest client of the jail? Is that a fair question? I mean, it's only 100 beds are in that jail, right?
No, that's just Akron's portion of them.
Pardon me?
That is just Akron's proportionate share of them. So that's what we reserve up to a daily basis. And in fact, if there are certain circumstances, sort of emergency situations, imagine if there's a riot or something like that, that number could change under the terms of the contract. But generally speaking, 100 beds is reserved for Akron's purposes.
And then I guess I would say, almost to answer my own question, how many total beds are there in that?
It fluctuates, Councilman Lombardo, due to jail construction and whatnot. Just under 700 usually, but it's a little bit lower right now because they're in a major HVAC sort of project. And so I think it's somewhere in the high 500s, low 600s is capacity. Most of it is felony level offenses. As Mr. Angeloni stated, this is for us to reserve some space for misdemeanors out of the city of Akron.
Yeah, because at one time the city of Akron had their own jail. Wasn't that called the workhouse?
Yes, that's correct.
And then we haven't had that since.
That has been done away with for decades now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Fusco.
Thank you, Chairman. The terms, and I apologize, I was looking at something else here, but the terms are, and this is for a one-year term, right? And
that's correct.
Yeah, and so they're in essence the same, the terms for the next year?
Yes, there's a modest increase for cost of, essentially, cost adjustment of 2 or 3%. I can't recall off the top of my head if it's 2 or 3%, but that's exactly what it is. But other than that, yes, the amount has not changed.
Okay, good, and everything else is equal and the same for the next
Correct, the
year.
number of beds has not changed.
Gotcha,
That's right.
gotcha.
The term is really the big change from 5 years down to 1.
Right. Okay, but the rest of it is the same. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Amobian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question has to do, I know we're paying almost $5 million, and I'm not asking you to itemize everything, but for those individuals who go there and they're in the specialized pod for those that have mental illness or other issues going on, there's a higher rate for that. I know they get additional services.
My understanding, Councilwoman, is that this is a flat number, so we just pay a flat rate per bed per day. And I can't recall right this second, but I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 to $90 a bed per day. I know that it's generally in that vicinity, so you're close. So no, I don't think it changes or fluctuates based on the services that are provided.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from any committee or council members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have 100 beds for Akron, right?
That's correct.
What happens if you go with a number?
Well, what I will say is that they are only guaranteeing, under the terms of this agreement, they are only guaranteeing us 100 beds per day. If we were to, for whatever reason, go over that number, again, if there's some sort of, crazy unforeseen circumstance that occurs, one of two things. One, there may not be room at the inn and we have to seek shelter elsewhere, right? So we'd have to contract with another entity. Two is that the rate may change. So we're looking at a flat rate, like I said, between $80 and $90 a night per bed. Perhaps we have to pay more. It just depends. So again, we're guaranteeing this number of beds per day at a flat rate, and that is our guarantee under this contract. If we exceed those terms or go beyond them for whatever reason, then that's subject to fluctuation.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? What's your preference on this, Mr. Angelo?
Consent, please.
Can I get a motion?
Motion for consent.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Our last piece is an ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into an agreement with the County of Summit for the provision of direct indictment services and declaring an emergency. Who will be speaking? Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Members of council, the direct indictment program is a partnership we've enjoyed for over 25 years now. And essentially what it allows us to do is to make for the more efficient, streamlined presentation of felony level offenses to the grand jury. Prior to the inception of the direct indictment program in the late 90s, we would be conducting preliminary hearings on all felony offenses, and then those cases could exist in sort of a legal limbo for 30, 60, even 90 days. A felony case doesn't mature into a full, complete case until there's an indictment by the grand jury. By organizing our efforts with the Summit County Prosecutor's Office and the Akron Police Department, we're able to streamline getting the reports and information and statements and evidence into the hands of the County Prosecutor's Office. They employ certain investigators that package this up for presentation for the prosecutor that presents the matters to grand jury. What that accomplishes is the matters are presented within 10 to 15 days versus 30 or 60 days. Our victims and the offenders get some sense of certainty whether the case is moving forward or not. In addition to those benefits, in late 90s, it was a cost of almost $800,000 to pay the cost of officers to come in to testify at the preliminary hearings. We don't have to pay that type of overtime right now, and I could only imagine what that would look like in 2024 dollars. If you have any other questions about the program, how it works, I'm certainly happy to entertain.
Thanks very much. In the past, I have experienced working with direct indictment, and it really has streamlined it tremendously and saved some funds. So it's a great program. I'm really happy that we're going forward with it. Any questions by any committee members? Any other council members? What's your preference, sir?
Consent.
Can I get a motion for consent?
Motion for consent.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. If there's nothing else to come before us, public safety will be adjourned. Thank you.
Our next committee of the day will be the Budget and Finance Committee, and it will begin at 3 o'clock. Those committee members are Lombardo, Amobian, Fusco, Boys, and Hardy. Again, that's the Budget and Finance Committee, and it will begin at 3 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, it's 3 o'clock, and our next committee of the day is the Budget and Finance Committee. Those committee members are Lombardo, Amobian, Fusco, Boyes, and Hardy. We do have all committee members present whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. I'd like to call the Budget and Finance meeting to order and start off with can I get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
Motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? Very good. Minutes are passed. We have two pieces here. First one being a resolution adopting our annual operating budget for the fiscal year 2024 and declaring an emergency. We have our Director of Finance, Steve Fricker here today, and our Deputy Director, Mike Wheeler. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the first of two pieces associated with the 2024 operating budget, and these are adopted in tandem. So there's a resolution that basically presents the budget, and then there will be, the next piece will be the appropriation ordinance where we actually put the dollar amounts that we'll be budgeting for 2024 in.
Start off with any questions initially for any members of our committee.
And obviously requesting time on these.
Exactly. Okay. And no other questions from any other committee members. So can I get a motion for time, please?
So move.
Second? Is there a second? Second. Second. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Very good. Motion for time passes. Our second piece here is a ordinance to make the annual appropriation for the current expenses and other expenditures and the capital outlays of the City of Akron for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2024, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you,
Again,
Mr. Chairman.
Fricker.
So this is the appropriation ordinance. As always, this is structured in a format where we are going to appropriate amounts for each department and fund combination. So for example, the police department within the general fund, and within each one of those department fund combinations, there are then two categories. There's the wage and benefits category, which covers obviously all of the anything compensation related, as well as all of the fringe benefits, pension and Medicare costs. And then there's the other category, which basically covers any type of supplier expenses, as well as any inter-fund expenses. So there are expenses that are transferring monies back and forth between funds. So all of those are covered in the other category. One other thing I would like to mention is many of you on council remember we had a very robust conversation last year around what used to be Section 56, which basically allowed for the contracting of professional services, and that was contained within the operating budget. That language has been entirely removed from this operating budget. So there is still a Section 54 that basically has some language that basically it just allows us to make disbursements, but there is no language in this budget ordinance that allows the administration to contract for personal services or professional services over $50,000. Those pieces will all come to council.
Sorry. Thank you. I know we have a presentation coming, but before we start, would there be any questions from our committee members or any other council members? Okay. All right. So we can, well, with this, you're asking for time.
Correct, yes,
Okay.
time.
All right. And can I get a motion for time?
Motion for time.
Second.
And a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Motion for time. So this week, we will get right at it with our budget meetings.
So
3 to 5
as
o'clock.
council's aware, so we will have a week of budget hearings with 3 separate days with different departments going on each day, and those will take place tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday between 3 and 5 o'clock. Today, what we're going to do is present Mayor Malik's overview of the 2024 operating budget. So before you, with the appropriation ordinance that we just read in, we have an $815 million operating budget. So by comparison, last year's operating budget was $798 million. So up about 1.2% from last year. It includes, and we'll go over a number of these things, so there are obviously cost of living increases that went in for all the employees, and those vary based on the bargaining unit. We'll cover that in the overview. We do expect 2% growth in our income tax this year. That's what we forecasted. And then we had, which we've already seen, based on the assessed valuation that we got from the county, that the property tax collection should be up about 24% in 2024. This budget, as it has over the past 2 years, does rely somewhat on the ARPA funding that we've received in order for the general fund to have a balanced budget. And we'll talk about that as we get down into the general fund section. And then, as I mentioned, so this year, the wage increases were 3% for police, fire, and non-bargaining, and then 4% for 1360 and CSPA. And those are just based on the way the collective bargaining agreements are structured. So the big components of this budget, and obviously number one is public safety. So we've been able to budget for larger numbers of uniformed police officers and firefighters than we have in the past. So both police and fire at times throughout the course of this year will be hitting levels that they haven't in several years. So the police department recently hired a class, and I believe that the class ended up being 46 new police officers, which allowed them to reach a level of 488 uniformed officers. So we believe that's the highest that they've been. We've been checking with police. That's the highest they've been in about 20 years. And then the fire department hired a class right at the end of last year, which brought them up near 400. I think they got to about 397 or 398. And then they will have another class this year in the fall that will bring them up to 402 sworn firefighters. So again, those are the highest levels that we've seen, and we believe it's a little bit longer for them. It's closer to 30 years for fire. So both the police and fire uniform staffing has been well funded with this budget. In addition to that, we also have some violence intervention funding that's in here in the area of public safety that will be addressed through the ARPA budget, and we will have a detail of what those items are, but there are many programs within the ARPA budget directed to violence intervention and prevention through the ARPA funding. And then finally, we're adding a couple of additional positions within public safety. So one of which is an emergency management director, something that the city has never had. So that will be a new role. I think it was, we had a press release that basically Chief Natco is going to fill that role, starting later this year. So that's the first time that we've had an emergency management role in the city. And then we're also going to add a dedicated position towards developing strategies around recruiting and retaining safety forces. So we feel like we need a more concentrated approach to that. So we're adding another position, and that's going to be within the safety administration budget that's dedicated towards trying to recruit and retain officers and firefighters in all of our safety forces. And then obviously with the new administration, the new mayor, Mayor Malik, has many priorities around developing strategies in a number of key areas. So he has created new roles in the areas of public safety, education, economic development, health, housing, and sustainability in terms of the environment. So there are several new roles that are budgeted within this budget, to carry out those strategies.
Thank you so much. We'll look forward.
Hold on.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't
Still
want to cut you
going,
off.
still going, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know.
A couple other strategic initiatives. So we're going to invest about $500,000 in youth out-of-school opportunities, and that's going to be a partnership with the Youth Success Summit, and you'll be hearing more about that as we present the budgets later this week. We're also investing $750,000 in the Thrive Economic Development Program, and that's designed to help minority businesses with economic development. So that's going to be a component of the ARPA budget. And then finally, we have $250,000 that is going to go to support the city's bicentennial effort that's coming up in 2025. In terms of personnel and staffing, as we've talked about many times, about close to 70% of our general fund cost is staffing. So we've invested quite a bit in some additional roles within the city. And some of these are general fund, some of these are not. So for example, we are in the midst of a water meter project right now where we're installing new radio read or Wi-Fi read meters. And as a part of that, we're going to hire 6 additional people within the water department to assist with that project. In addition, we're hiring some people in our parks division to help in 2 areas. So we received an Acorn grant that is going to help with the city's tree canopy and planting trees all over the city. So we're hiring a landscape technician to handle that function. And then we're also hiring 2 additional landscapers that are going to be dedicated towards the assets that have been added downtown in terms of the maintenance type thing. So we've added, a number of parks-like areas downtown along Main Street, the planters and things like that. So we're going to add 2 additional landscapers to help save. And eventually, what we do at Lock 3 is going to require more maintenance. So we've added 2 additional landscapers that are going to be charged to our downtown operations budget to assist with the assets downtown in terms of maintaining those. The Akron Municipal Court has added really about 4 new positions. We're highlighting 2 of them here. So there's a mediator and a housing specialist for the municipal court. And that's going to be a first step in the right to counsel type services that we're putting in, with the city. Akron City Council is adding 2 new positions. One is a public policy specialist and one is a council community liaison. So there's 2 additional positions in council. So all in, the city will now have a grand total of 2,055 full-time budgeted positions, and that's up from 2019 last year. Now, as we talk about often, and there will be a graph that covers this, we will likely never hit that 2,055 number because at any given time, the city typically has at least 100 vacant positions. So right now, we're at about 1,943, I believe, when I checked the count this morning. Mike, why don't you take the ARPA?
Yeah. So it wouldn't be a budget presentation without talking about ARPA for a brief second here. And many of you have met Mitch. We have Mitch Lindstrom from Guidehouse with us today, and we will be speaking more about not only this year, but through 2026 and beyond as part of a brief presentation from them after this. But with 2024 being the obligation deadline, we are trying to capture as much as we can in what we know now of obligations. So really locking down
projects like Reservoir and both the pool and the community center reconstruction. We're budgeting in totality about $28.9 million. But what's unique about this is while we're budgeting it now, a lot of these costs may not materialize this year, and they will be materializing between now and December 31st, 2026, which is the end of the obligation period. We're also going to be obligating $7.5 million towards housing rehab and supporting CDCs. This represents bringing the 2.0 version of the Akron Home Repair Program to life, and let's continue.
Okay. So briefly, we'll cover, and I've already talked about a little bit of this, the assumptions that we made. As I mentioned, we are expecting the income tax revenue to grow about 2%. So by comparison last year, we also were forecasting a 2% growth in the tax, and it ended up being closer to 5%. It was about 4.9%. So we hope that we're underestimating the tax. We did see a better year than we expected last year, so we're hoping for another good year. But we're pretty conservative, so we're budgeting at 2% increase this year. The local government funds will remain stable. That's about $8.2 million in our general fund. So that has actually grown a little bit over the past few years, but if you remember, 10 years ago, we used to get around $14 million for that, and the state made some changes. It got as low as down around $6 million, and it has grown a little bit very gradually over the past few years, so now it's up to about $8.2 million. The property taxes we talked about, so the assessed valuations in Akron went up about 25%. We're expecting about a 24% increase in our property tax collection. So overall, the property tax will this year bring in about $40 million. About 24.6 of that goes into the general fund. So that's an increase of about $4.8 million in the general fund and about $2.1 million in the EMS fund from the property taxes this year. And then we talked about the general fund utilizing ARPA money. So we have budgeted within ARPA about $10.5 million. The way this budget is structured right now, it would take about $8.8 million of that in order to balance the general fund. So we do have a little bit of extra capacity within the ARPA fund. In order to make a flat general fund budget, I need about $8.8 million. On the expenditure side, as we talked about, these are the wage increases. So as I said, 3% for police, fire, and non-bargaining, and then 4% for CSPA and ASME. The healthcare costs will remain stable this year. So we have a self-insurance fund that pays all of these city claims for both active employees and retirees. We fund that fund by charging the department $1,800 per full-time employee per month. So that ends up being about $21,600 per full-time employee each year, and that brings in enough money to pay the health claims and all the admin fees that we have in our self-insurance fund. Already talked about the new classes of police and fire. So as I said, police just brought on a class within the last few weeks, and then fire should have a class of approximately 30 that starts in September. And then overall, the ARPA spend this year should be about $61 million. Okay. This page is just kind of for reference for the council members, just to kind of understand the different categories that we're budgeting that you're going to see on the documents that we provide and go through over the next 3 days. So it just kind of outlines the different expenditure categories. So as I talked about with the appropriation ordinance, the very top category, wages and benefits, that's one group of appropriations within the appropriation ordinance, and then all of the other accounts fall under that other category. So for each fund department combination, we're budgeting wages and benefits and other. Okay, James, you have a question?
No, wait till the end, wait till the end.
Yeah. So the general fund. So last year, we were able to grow our general fund balance, and based on a little bit better than expected tax revenues, back up to about where we were at the end of 2021. So we have about a $28.7 million balance in our general fund. So that represents not quite a 2-month reserve of funds. To get to that, we would need about $35 million. But we're in a much better position than where the city was several years ago when we had, well into the, less than $10 million of fund balance. So we've grown to where we have a little bit of reserve if there's an economic downturn. So in terms of the taxes, we talked about the income tax growth that we expect to see, 2%. Also within that are the higher property taxes that we should see, so about a $4.8 million increase in the property taxes. And then we have about $6.5 million of JED budgeted for the general fund. The intergovernmental, that's really two components. So it's the local government tax that I talked about, and that's about $8.2 million. And then there's also, we get tax from the Ohio casinos, which is about $3.9 million. So that is actually another area that we've actually seen a little bit of growth. So for years, we were getting about $3.2 million from the casino tax, and now it's grown to about $3.9 million. So that is helping a little bit offset some of the losses from the tangible personal property tax and the inheritance tax and the things that the state phased out years ago. Some of that is being offset by these taxes, but it still doesn't bring in the same amount of revenue that we did 10, 15 years ago. The charges for services are largely the same as last year, so we have pretty stable charge for service revenues within the general fund, and that's primarily the revenues that we get from the curb service operation, from the municipal courts, from our recreation bureau. So the items that we charge fees for come into that category. And then the miscellaneous revenues are largely interfund transfers, and then, as I talked about, the ARPA amount is in there. So one thing I want to explain, and this is something I explained last year, that in reality, we will not transfer ARPA revenues into the general fund. What we will do is actually move general fund expenses, and those will be safety force, wage costs, primarily overtime. We will actually transfer those to the ARPA fund. So in reality, this $210 million, if everything goes according to plan, will be $10 million less than that. And so it will also be that way on the expenditure side. So we're showing the expenditures as we expect them to occur within each department, because we wanted to kind of have a good look at what the operations actually cost. But in reality, we're going to take police and fire costs and transfer them to ARPA, and we will not have $10 million of ARPA revenue coming into the general fund. So I know that's a little confusing, but we did that, and it's the same thing we did last year, just to really try to account for the true cost of the operations within the general fund. Okay, and with that, I'll let Mike talk about the breakdown in our revenues and expenses.
So, next slide.
Here we go.
So we've spent a decent amount of time talking about our assumptions. And, we want to point out that we are primarily an income tax-based city. So why we take the conservative approach of having 2% growth after having a 5% year is if there are looming refunds that could be out there that we don't know about, or as discussed, if we have an economic downturn. So this year we are projecting just straight income tax revenues of $113 million, which is up from $105 that we received last year. We're planning conservatively again, so that way if we do have these revenues materialize, we can actually lessen what we use in revenue replacement from ARPA and really not have to rely on ARPA to subsidize our uniform, police, and fire overtime costs. Another thing I'd like to point out is the property taxes. We're budgeting $24 million, which is about 12%. They're going to be stable for the next couple of years after coming out through the revaluation. So as much as it's a pain for our citizens, it does kind of lock it in for us for a couple of years, which makes it a little bit easier to project. And while we do have 4 JED districts, which we ultimately get some JED revenues from, that only ultimately makes up about 3% of our revenues.
Are we allowed to ask questions? Okay. Yeah, what's the real estate tax increase?
As in?
Yeah, it went from 23 to 24, a percentage amount. What was the valuation? I mean, what was the real estate tax increase? How much?
So we went from 20 million to collecting, or last year we collected 20 million. This year we're expecting to collect 24 million. So it's about 24%, 25%, like Steve said. And then going on, in terms of expenditures, our biggest expense for our general fund is our other major operating funds, water and sewer, labor. 70% of this budget is just staffing costs. This includes the new classes. And to Steve's point, not only are we capturing the expenses here for police and fire in totality, but we are capturing them in ARPA as well. If there's any questions about that, I'll pause here for a second before moving on. Next slide. Thank you. One of the things that we do as we're going through this process is we do map out all the funds we expect to, or all the revenues we expect to collect by fund. So we're doing a 2-year comparative, 22 to 23, and what we're expecting to collect for every fund here in 24. Between everything, it's going to be about $735 million, which is a little bit less than last year, primarily for 2 reasons. We are no longer collecting any distributions from the federal government in ARPA, and we are actually in the process of spending that down, which we'll discuss on the next slide, please. This slide, the gross expenditures by fund, is what we're appropriating in totality. So this $814 million that's represented at the bottom is also what ties back to the appropriation ordinance. It's higher than the previous slide, primarily because not only are we drawing down on ARPA, but we're beginning to draw down on the sewer fund balance in order to pay the debt service that is now coming due. Any questions? Next slide. This is one of the slides that we typically present, and this is just to show how we've been budgeting full-time employees across the city. This year, we're projecting our highest in the past 5 years of 2,055 full-time employees. This includes not only the addition of the 8 new appointed positions, but the increases that Steve has been talking about in police and fire uniform. We do believe that we're in a point that we can sustain this as we begin to rely less on ARPA. As part of it, we're also projecting 1,234 full-time employees in the general fund. And the reason we have 0.3 of a person there is that person or a couple people are split between funds, which is a fun concept to explain. Okay, next slide. And so we keep talking about police and fire uniform and the overtime that's been going on for the past couple of years. And what has occurred is after coming out of one of our lowest years with COVID, where things stopped operating, we came back in full force in 2021. And that's what this bar graph represents, is the amount of overtime in millions that has been spent in past couple of years through 2023, with the projected decreases beginning in 2024. The line chart, which is for both police and fire, represents our staffing levels and where they've been in each of these past few years, including our highest counts in the past couple of decades for both departments. The goal of staffing appropriately now is to bring down the overtime across the board. So that way we're not having to rely on the uniform, and we can use the revenues that we're bringing in to aptly staff everyone. In 2023, we can really see that police, as they've been ramping up, we are projecting their overtime to come down. The caveat is with fire and the loss of AMR. We know that AMR has hurt us, and we are projecting that that our EMS department will bring in $4 million in revenues, EMS revenues. Previously, it had been about 2. We're hoping that we really start seeing that materialize this year. And as these revenues come in to supplement, we hope that fire, similarly, the overtime amount comes down. Any questions?
What would you contribute that to, though, in terms of, you'd mentioned previously it was 2, and now you're expecting 4?
It's because we're doing we have LifeForce, which bills for our EMS unit. We're expecting, since AMR is no longer performing those services, that we're going to start seeing that revenue, and then that would be supplementing the existing revenue.
Thank you.
And finally, this final slide represents what we're budgeting for ARPA in 2024. As I mentioned earlier, this represents the obligation cliff, and Mitch here will be explaining what that means in detail as part of the services that Guidehouse performs for us. Some of the highlights here, as previously discussed, is our continued support of the water main program. It is the desire of the administration to eliminate as many lead lines as possible and potentially be one of the first Midwest cities to completely eliminate lead lines in the next few years. Going through parks and public spaces, this captures not only the Mayor Horgan's administration's desires to revamp the community centers, but really put in the commitment of moving forward with the reservoir and the design there of both the pool and the community center. Under housing, rehabilitation of existing homes, that is what we obligate in the Treasury for the Akron Home Repair Program. I've mentioned it before, and I'll say it again. As soon as we have details on what Akron Home Repair 2.0 looks like, we'll be excited to share them. At this point, I cannot say anything as we work through the process. The CDC support is in support of the well and their housing rehab programs. The violence prevention represents 2 distinct buckets. The first is the safety-related investment, which is the flock and fuses cameras. We have seen great benefits in recent weeks even, and we're continuing to fund those through ARPA through this year. We also see violence and intervention and prevention programming. We will be talking more about the Youth Success Summit, but this captures not only some of the work that Danico Buckley Knight had been performing under Mayor Horgan, but under what we'll be moving forward with under Mayor Malik. Access to health care and social services. And the biggest new item here is we are able to allocate $1 million to support homelessness programs. This is a program that will be led by Helen Tomick of Long Range Planning, and as we begin to allocate what that million looks like, we'll be sure to update council. Medical debt relief, as we all know, is being performed by RIP Medical Debt. The contract has been signed, and at this point, everything happens behind closed doors. And as they buy debt in tranches and they notify citizens, we become aware almost simultaneously. And finally, the mobile hygiene unit is also known as the shower bus. We'll be moving forward with that later this year, but we are committed to making them a beneficiary, and they will be receiving $75,000. The last piece of this is the city budget stabilization. Project administration represents the costs of our consultants at Guidehouse and attorneys that we have used at Voorhees. The 2024 budgeted revenue replacement allows for some things that we have already previously done, such as the police and fire overtime that we've talked about, as well as the last of the bonuses for CSPA. The 66,000 represents some functions that we went through last year, including revitalizing the city website. And with that, that makes up about the 61 million that we plan on spending or obligating this year. I'll be handing it over to Mitch to perform a ARPA update here, unless anyone has any questions.
Okay, Councilman Hardy.
So relating to ARPA, so I hear you when you say that we're budgeting, 10, but probably only assume that 8.8 million would actually go to balance the general
Correct.
fund. This is the last year we can do that. Am I also hearing correctly that you both feel that we will be able to sustain these budget increases despite ARPA going away because of additional revenue that will be coming in? Because this is the genesis of my question. I'm really happy that we're at where we're at with the fund balance. And I worry about having to dip into the fund balance to cover general fund because ARPA goes away, we have a budget gap, and our revenue doesn't meet what we thought. That's the nature of the question.
Right. So first of all, I don't know that this is absolutely the last year that we can do this. So we will have ARPA funds, as you know, we have until 2026 to actually spend. Right. We have till the end of this year to obligate.
Okay.
So I think that, and there remains a lot to be seen about how this year goes and where we are with projects and things like that, but I do believe that there will be at least some revenue stabilization amounts left for next year.
For next year, okay.
So.
We didn't utilize them all last year either, so you have a couple of years that have been building a little bit. And then on top of that, we are projecting the worst in terms of income tax collections. We're not projecting what could happen. We're saying, let's take a step back.
Okay.
Think from that perspective.
So we're being as conservative as possible, just making sure we don't have to raid the general fund, okay, or the cash balance. Yeah.
It's both. You're right.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilman Fusco.
Yeah, the CDC support you had mentioned for $3 million, all $3 million in 2024 is going to the well?
This is their current obligation amount, unless, I believe this is just the well's obligation for their homelessness.
For $3 million, they're getting everything?
I believe there is something with North Hill CDC that is yet to be finalized as well. There's a affordable housing development that they're working on.
Okay, good. But this $3 million is going to be part of the North Hill piece, or all $3 million going to the well? Just curious.
My understanding is that 2.5 was dedicated to the well, and I believe they've already seen some of that cash.
Good.
They've seen a little bit.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Hey, Sarah, I don't see anybody else if they have any questions.
Yeah. And real quick, before Mitch gets started with his update on ARPA, I'd like to briefly kind of go through what you see on the screen here is the directory that we have shared with all of the council people. So just kind of want to go through the various files that are out there. So the
Mr. Bricker, if we can interrupt one more for one question before we start that. Go ahead.
Apologies if this is totally out of whack, but I figured this is a question that won't come up in the budget hearings, but what kind of losses did we take on the parking decks last year?
So
what are we projecting this year?
About $2 million, yeah. So in the general fund, we advanced $2 million from the general fund to the parking fund, which means because we advanced it rather than subsidize it, the parking fund has to pay the money back to the general fund. So this year I'm budgeting $4 million. Yeah, so that's, yeah. So now I will say this. So we have recently formed a group that is taking an in-depth look at all of our parking facilities to see, what improvements we can make both potentially on the revenue side and on the expense side to make those decks perform better financially.
Thank you. Okay, I want to go over the draft.
So just real quick, on my screen is the directory that we have shared with council. There's a number of files out here. So the first one is a position count. And let me try to do this so I can see it better. Unfortunately, the Zoom thing is in the way, so I can't get to my tabs. How do I?
Grab it right there.
There we go. All right, there we go. Okay, so the first file is a position count for each cost center. So this is, we've provided this every year. We've made it look a little bit nicer this year, but this is basically the summary of all the positions budgeted within. So we talked about 2,055 full-time employees. This will show by each department what those specific positions are and the counts and in comparison with last year. So also we have, and this is the file that we will be utilizing throughout the course of the budget hearings over the next 3 days. So at the beginning of that document is the schedule of the hearings along with page numbers. And within this document, there are links to each of the pages within each department. So, for example, if I click on AMATS, it's going to take me right to the AMATS page. So just want council to know that that document is out there and it is indexed such that you can jump quickly to each page if you wanted to. What else do we have out here? The executive summary, and that's the document that we just went through in the overview. Something new this year, we created basically just an Excel version of the entire budget that is really, it's not formatted, it's just a giant grid of numbers. So it's all of the numbers that contained in the documents that we'll be going through, but it's just in a very data-specific format. And we also have the council retreat presentation that we went through, I think it was last month, but whenever we met down at Bounce, that presentation is also in this directory. And we'll be adding things throughout the course. We're about ready to put the goals and objective documents out there. Those should be out there later today. And then other things that, as there's questions, we'll be posting more documents out in this directory.
Thank you so much. Without further ado.
Yeah, before we go any further, I just want to take a second to recognize the Department of Finance's audit and budget staff with us here today, led by Teresa Klein here, our audit and budget supervisor, and then the members sitting in the first row over there. So just if you could just stand up for a second. So on the far right, we have Noah Thompson, Zachary Hewitt, Teresa Payne, Liz Clow, and, well, I think Monica Four had to leave early, but Monica Four is the last one. So thank you for all the effort, not only on this, but on the ordinance as well.
Thank you.
I'm now going to, as soon as I can bring it up on the screen, turn it over to Mitch Lundstrom from Guidehouse to take us through his ARPA update for us.
All right. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see some of you again and some new faces as well. My name's Mitch Lindstrom. I've been supporting the City of Akron since late 2001 with the full-term first birthday project, and in addition to the City of Akron's ARPA services. When I'm not wearing my ARPA and grants management hat, I'm leading our state and local government's evidence-based policymaking and decision-making practice, some of which has played out in the work that we partner with the city on. So next slide. Oh, nope, that's a good one. So just a little bit of history on who our firm is and what we do. We are a full-service management consulting firm. We serve both the commercial and public sector. Specifically, we are one of the few large national firms that has a dedicated state and local government practice. And we've provided and supported clients throughout throughout the state of Ohio, whether that be the Ohio Department of Development, the City of Dayton, Akron Public Schools, and the list goes on and on. In addition to bringing nationwide expertise. So City of Baltimore, Seattle, many of the big name cities, about 36 different states are current or previous clients. Really our mission is to outwit complexity. That slogan comes from the idea that a lot of our problems are complex and they require multiple areas of expertise and multiple stakeholders to solve for them, and the best we can do is ask for a seat at the table, which Akron has invited us to. And so next slide. I'm not going to talk too much, but what I've laid out there is sort of our state and local government's core capabilities, grants management, business process optimization, in addition to some of our housing and procurement staff are ones that the city is currently taking advantage of with our supports. But then we have others like broadband, digital equity. That's probably our largest and most robust shop on the strategy side of things. But why we're here is to talk about our COVID-19 relief funding. We represent over 65 state and local governments across the nation, managing just over now $60 billion worth of pandemic relief funds in the various forms that they've taken. We're proud to say that we have not had a audit finding or clawback of funds in all of those instances and with 100% of our clients. If you go to the next slide. And one of the elements that it's allowed us to build in terms of capacity is our Center of Excellence. What this is this is a internal group that brings together all of our leaders and subject matter experts to a common forum where we share nationwide best practices. We leverage tools that are built that we can then provide to not only our clients, but your clients as well, your grantees, to make sure that they can manage these funds in the most effective and compliant ways as possible. So we do have a large center of excellence, which I play a leadership role on, representing the Midwest. And then, of course, we have additional centers of excellence that centralize knowledge, covering the categories you see there: disaster relief, broadband, transportation, climate and sustainability, housing, health and human services, and then fraud and financial crime prevention. So at any one time, Steve, Michael, or a handful of other PMs can reach out and tap into that group's expertise. Next slide. All right, so to set the stage, what we're here to talk about today is the American Rescue Plan Act, specifically the state and local fiscal relief dollars. You're going to hear me refer to this as ARPA generally, but ARPA is a part or is a much larger bill that has roughly 29 different programs, some of which you see represented up here. The city received $145 million directly from the federal government, which is the focus of what we'll discuss here today. The SLRF. That's why we go to ARPA, because SLRF doesn't really roll off the tongue like we want it to. So we'll go to the next slide here. And so really, where's the city at? The city is still in the throes of it, right? So what you see represented here is the life cycle of federal grants. You receive a grant, you allocate that funding to something or someone, you then execute that program, right? And whatever that mission is. And then there's a closeout process really where you have to check a handful of compliance boxes, pull together all the documentation, and fully close that program out. And then eventually there's some form of audit, right? And within all of that, there is program and project monitoring, right? So whether it's Lock 3 and a construction project, or you've granted some funds, you've granted some funds to a local nonprofit to provide after-school mentoring, you're required by the feds to monitor the progress, right? And progress means both performance So are they actually doing what they said they were going to do, what we paid them to do, and what impact are they making in their scope of work, but also the financials, right, that the money's being spent in the way that it's sent. And so what you see up there is replicated well over 39 times, right, because each project has to go through these pieces. So the city is in a good place, which we can go to the next slide, which I want to uplift, but I also want to uplift we're still in the real core of the execution of this program. To date, the city has obligated, meaning they've put funds under contract, really broadly speaking, 72% of your total funding amount, which we feel is really, really healthy. It's far and above some of your peers and far and above many states. And in addition to that, you've spent or expensed roughly 47%, so almost 50%, which is right on the money where our goals were set a few years back in terms of where we wanted to be. So again, in a very healthy spot from, our worst fear, which is the feds coming in and going, hey, you didn't hit our deadline, you need us to give those millions of dollars back. So we're in that space. But we'll talk a little bit today about what that obligation cliff looks like, because one of those major federal deadlines is coming up. And we're going to also share what we're doing about that to make sure that, all $45.3 million does stay in here. In addition to the $145 million, due to some good maneuvering by your finance department early on in the pandemic, the city has earned upwards of $8 million of interest. It's important to note, though, that that is flexible funding that really serves a risk mitigation element at this point. And what I mean by that is there are capital projects and other expenses that the city's already committed to with ARPA funds that may exceed their budget after the obligation period, and there may be needs for those. And so at this point in time, it's not really extra money for new projects as much as it is risk mitigation to make sure that what's already committed to gets seen through. But we'll talk a little bit more about that starting on the next slide.
Mitch, if I can interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
The $8 million of interest,
Yeah.
that follow the same rules and guidelines as the $145 million?
The answer is no. So the Treasury has provided flexibility. They answered this pretty bluntly in a FAQ, and they stated that both uniform guidance and the final rule guidance does not apply to it, which is even why it's more beneficial.
Thank you.
I want to step in just for 1 second. And recently, we brought back the legislation to extend Guidehouse's contract through 2027. That's partially not only because we can utilize it in this capacity, but because we will be having audits that go through 2027 for the period ending of 2026.
Yep. And so when we talk about the obligation deadline, this is the number one focus of this year, in addition to seeing some of these projects through. But from a finance standpoint, there's an obligation cliff coming. And what that means is by, simply put, December 31st of this year, 2024, the city is required to have 100% of these dollars tied up in contracts. After that point, there's no moving projects, changing projects, or quite frankly, in a lot of cases, changing vendors at this point, right? And so as Steve was speaking to in the budget presentation, that's why you're seeing some of these, particularly construction contracts, where they're represented in the budget this year to get things under contract, but even though we might not be spending it till later in the year. Additional constraints posed by this are that in 2025 and onward, change orders, that means no additional change orders for construction projects that can be charged to the ARPA account. Staff time for the city, not that the city had been doing a ton of that, but you can't charge any staff time. It really, we're anticipating the entire Treasury portal will sort of freeze up. It will lose functionality. They'll take that piece away. And so what that means is not only do we need to obligate all these funds by the end of the year, but we need to be darn sure we have an accurate estimate of those costs, that vendors have been vetted, and that we know we're going to see that through 2026. In addition to that, we are working off of an interim final rule, so a draft rule from the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury Department. So more guidance is coming, and there's still some questions left unsaid that will help inform our strategy to make sure that, part of my job and my team's job is to make sure that the city has as much flexibility as is possible within the guidelines and rules. So there's still some more guidance that will help inform this down the line. So if you go to the next slide, what we've done is we've done a breakdown of all of the ARPA-funded projects there for you. Don't expect you to read that. We can also zoom in there. We do have a spreadsheet we can provide to you at any time that ties to all the contracts. But the key is, with this one is that blue column, those blue bar charts, we need to get them all to 100% by the end of the year. That's, simply put, that's our mission. Again, we feel like we have a plan in place, and if you go to the next slide, I can speak a little bit to what that strategy looks like. Broken out by quarters, so really we're in step one, which is clearly defining what obligation means and going around to every stakeholder, City Council being one of them, and making sure they also understand the gravity of this regulation and this rule. In addition to identifying any incomplete projects funded and exactly where they're at, which we've already done, right? So it's really just making sure we have a sense of truth, how many dollars are left out there, which projects haven't even moved yet, right? Reservoir Pool being one of them, which we've spoken about. But in addition to making sure everybody's educated on these constraints. Step two, as we move into quarter two, is really going to be about really getting a fine tune on project spend again at another layer. Any active project, we're going to be going back to all the project managers requesting detailed, updated budgets that go all the way through 2026, right? So some grantees, some of the construction projects, what does that spend look like all the way through 2026? So getting really hyper clear on the numbers. We'll have some facilitated back and forth and do quite a bit of financial analysis and risk analysis to see where there might be places that there may be delays, et cetera, and we'll create plans to address those. In Guidehouse, my team will make recommendations to the city based on what we find about some of the nuanced maneuvers that we can do with some of the funds to make sure that the city has flexibility. So that's quarter two is, and then quarter three is really just refining things, right? Taking action. The hope is that we can get everything obligated by quarter three. That's internally the goals we've set, and that's primarily because we don't want to wait till quarter four because it might already be too late. You all, of all people, know how long it can take sometimes to get something contracted and under contract in the public sector. And so we want to make sure that we're shooting for quarter three so that if something needs to be changed or pivoted, we can do so in the fourth quarter. So that's where we're at. I think we're all feeling pretty good about the path forward and where we're at, being able to hit this. But this is one of the first big, it was the first audit we had, getting some money out the door, right? And this is the next big milestone in this ARPA journey is making sure we hit all the funds being obligated, right? So that's a bit of where we're at from a spend standpoint. And if you go to the next slide, we can begin to touch on compliance monitoring, which is another major activity we have underway. So as part of having federal dollars, it comes with all of those fun federal strings, many of which get passed down to anybody who touches the money. And so there's regulatory compliance responsibilities that the city has, there's fiscal responsibilities, and then there's risk management. And so I'm not going to belabor this point. I've laid that out, essentially the work that we're doing, both with the city and your grantees, to make sure those boxes are checked. And if you go to the next slide, I'll give a little summary of where we were at last year. So last year, there was about 42 ARPA grantees in total, so 42 different organizations that received some portion of funding ranging from, I think, $10,000 all the way up to a few $1 million. Like Ohio Erie Canal Coalition got a larger set of funds last year. Our team provided well over 90 hours of technical assistance to those grantees. So that was everything from answering simple questions about their receipts to actually helping them develop ways to track staff time and payroll, particularly when you talk about our violence intervention prevention grantees. Many of them hadn't had the capacity before this, or even necessity, to go as nuanced with their nonprofit financials as they needed to, right? And so a big part of our work was getting those folks where they needed to be, so that they could not only spend their money compliantly now with the city, but hopefully they'll be more attractive to future funders as well, because they have that capacity and they've handled federal funds before. In addition, we reviewed well over, I just stopped counting at 156, to be honest with you, and just added the plus mark. We reviewed a lot of policies and procedures for all the organizations that got granted funds. A lot of documents that we put in, and then we held various trainings. So we held compliance trainings, we held strategic planning trainings, and a handful of other trainings for your grantees, so that in addition to the funds that they got, we're also investing in their capacity. Other things on the slide are really just the grantees that we have targeted for this coming year. We still have well over 20 grantees that are active that need to be monitored, and each year we have to redo all of the monitoring. So we get the pleasure of going through it as long as they're holding on to some of the city's funds. And then I just list some examples of deficiencies that we're helping correct. And next slide. And so I guess to sum it all up, we really have 4 kind of main goals this year. Number 1, without a doubt, is fully obligating all of the SLRF funds. Number 2 is enhancing operational efficiency. This administration has been at the forefront to making sure government works better, right? And there are some things that our shop has been able to observe and point out how they might be enhanced. And so the city's been embracing letting some of our experts come in and support with things like procurement and contracting, and seeing how can we make that work a little bit better, not only for the city, but city employees, but also for vendors. Maintaining compliance monitoring. This is one of those things you just have to do, right? So we have to continue to provide the compliance monitoring. And then 4th, expanding organizational knowledge. The narrative around ARPA is going to begin to shift. The narrative to date has been, what are they spending their money on? How did they decide how to spend their money? The narrative is going to begin to shift at the end of this year to, what impact did they make with the money? And being ready for those questions with data, with lived experience, whatever that might be, is going to be key for the city. There's a story to tell about how this money was spent, and there's things like what Danico's running and the VIP programs being evaluated, but there's other more nuanced data that you can pull retrospectively from a handful of these programs to determine truly what impact did we make. And so, although not a major focus or priority this year, it will be something that we consider as we go throughout the year.
Excuse me, can we take a very brief recess? I just lost connection to the Zoom meeting.
Oh.
Thank you.
There we go. They seem to realize.
Something happened.
Can you hear us?
We can hear you. I lost connection for a minute there. We'll be back in just a second. Thanks for your patience.
Thanks.
On number 4? Okay. How much of it did they hear?
I think it just went out. I mean, I think they missed 30 seconds there, maybe.
Oh, then they didn't miss too much. But that's all. That's all to say. Number 4 speaks to this idea that beginning to shift our narrative to make sure that we're capturing the metrics, pulling the data out, capturing the lived experiences of those impacted by the dollars spent, so that you can begin to tell that story, but also inform how you make decisions around other funding sources in the future. So those are our 4 goals. And now I will open it up to questions or comments.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yep.
Okay, we'll open up the floor to any committee members, budget committee members that have questions. I thought I saw Councilwoman Amobian. You had a question? Maybe not, no more?
I think I missed the whole last section, but maybe it's recorded. But that was my hand raised, was to let you know that we were not connected.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any hands. You have one comment, Councilman Fusco?
Just real quick, on a somewhat limited basis, but I will tell you this, that I did have the opportunity to work with Mitch, and you and your organization, nothing but professional, nothing but looking out for us. It was a wise investment for us as a city to go with Guidehouse. And we appreciate all of your efforts. And like I said, you've been nothing but professional to work with, and kind of looking out for our best interest, obviously, and that's what you're there for. The one question I have, and it's very speculative, but what I find not surprising, but interesting, is that many cities out there have not, they're not as far along as we are.
Yeah.
So, and I know you probably can't answer this, but I'm just curious, like, what are they going to do in Washington? I suppose November is going to dictate a lot moving forward, but I mean, are they going to extend these time frames, or
no?
What do you suspect?
No, we really doubt it, and that's just based on what we're hearing in Washington. I think regardless of the side, one side's going to be very happy to claw back some funds, and then the other side is going to be happy to have an automatic out to say they've clawed back some funds. So I think we've seen with a few of the other pandemic-related funds that haven't been spent to date that they've shut them down and repurposed the funds. So I do expect there will be a lot of noise and headlines around cities and states and counties getting their funds clawed back in around probably April of 2025 is when we expect for them to come back and ask for payment.
Okay, thank you. Will you be with us this week at all?
Yeah, so I'm actually here all this week, not necessarily just for the budget hearings, mainly for some other business process redesign stuff that we're supporting on, but I will be in the building, so, and these guys know if you text me, I will call you within about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, we appreciate your insight and your time. Thank you.
Of course.
Without any other comments, questions, we will adjourn for the Budget Committee meeting, and we will resume.
See you everyone tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you. 3 o'clock tomorrow. This meeting is adjourned.
That is the final committee meeting of the day. Council will meet in special session at 5 o'clock. Thank you.